The new Sennheiser IE600 has raised a lot of questions. Let's talk about it. So here it is. This is the new Sennheiser IE600. Name-wise, it fits between the IE300 and the IE900, and price point-wise, well, it's right there too. But sound-wise, this really stands out from the others in the lineup. Let's talk about it, starting with build and comfort. Now, IEM comfort's going to be very subjective because, well, our ears are all very differently shaped. This might fit my ear perfectly, but it might not for yours. That said, it does fit my ear perfectly. The IE600 is a very small IEM in a metal 3D printed chassis. 3D printed IEMs is not something I see very often, if really ever, but here it is. Inside is a single dynamic driver. There's a vent visible on the side. Two detachable cables come in the packaging, one with 3.5mm and the other with 4.4mm balanced. The case isn't anything crazy, it's very similar to that of the IE300 and 900. There's enough space inside to fit the IEMs, some extra tips, and both cables if you choose to carry them. I don't have any complaints about the stock cable. I think it does the job just fine, it's comfortable. I don't really see any need to replace it. Now, you could fit whatever tips you want on the nozzles of these IEMs, but the actual tips themselves that come with it, well, these have filters inside the ends. Now, I'm not entirely positive if these filters are for acoustic damping or if they're simply to help keep debris out of the IEM's nozzle, but I'm not too concerned about it because I do prefer the stock tips. Now let's get into the fun stuff. We're gonna talk about subjective sound first, then objective sound. Now, I'll say this right off the bat. I think this is the best IEM Sennheiser makes. I think it's better than the IE300, and I think it's better than the IE900. We'll talk about that a little bit more in objective sound also, but what this IEM does is a balance of the best things that both of those IEMs did. It's comfortable just like the 300 and the 900 are. It's premium feeling like the 900. It has rich, very deep sub bass, a little bit of warmth in the mid-range, sparkly treble that extends very high, a more than plentiful amount of detail, especially in the treble. But unlike the IE300 and IE900, well, the 600 never seems to get sibilant for me unless I really push it into uncomfortable volume levels. Now, this could still be described as a V-shaped tuning, but more so in the bass because we get bass elevation. It does sound pretty natural, though more bass emphasized than something like the HD560S. But interestingly enough, more comparable to how speakers I feel like sound like in a room. Now, that isn't the same case for imaging and soundstage, but certainly for tuning with the bass and mid-range. This leads to a sound that is surprisingly balanced, but still fun. I generally don't have a preference towards anything that is really V-shaped sounding, and these manage to be a little bit V-shaped, but also still be what I think might be the best sounding dynamic IEM on the market. It's funny because I was thinking that, and then I asked Critical his opinion about it, and he said the exact same thing, and I thought, well, that confirms it. Now, in terms of soundstage, like many IEMs, mono guitars and center channel vocals do have a very in-your-head sound, but the reverberations from these instruments and vocals definitely extend far outside the reaches of my skull here. The result is a pleasant soundstage. You do get intimacy when it matters, but you also get width. I think IEMs can be really good with immersion, especially if you're listening to tracks that do have a lot of space. And the IE600 is no exception from that. In fact, I would say that it is exemplary in that regard. Imaging is also excellent. It's not mind-blowing, but it's definitely good enough that I can pinpoint exactly where sounds are coming from. I do feel like things like the HD800S have much more laser-focused imaging than the IE600, but the HD800S is an expensive, full-sized, over-ear headphone. This is less than half the cost and goes in my ears or my pocket. Dynamics are great. I definitely think it's a good thing that Sennheiser vented this enclosure. And timbre holds up pretty well too. The big thing I'll say about the overall sound of this IEM, if you just want a quick overview from the subjective, is that bass is powerful and deep. There's a bit of warmth in the mid-range. Treble feels nice and sweet, not overly bright. You can tell there's an emphasis on upper treble, the ranges above 10 kilohertz. It does sound more emphasized than neutral, but I find that these ranges are not sibilant or harsh. I think on most headphones and IEMs, when we encounter sibilance, it's more in like the 6 kilohertz range, and these don't really struggle with that at all. So what we get is a nice sweet treble that's very airy, it's very sparkly, and I don't feel like it's going to stab me in the ears. So with all of that said, I think it's obvious I like the subjective tuning of the IE600. Let's talk about the objective. Now here's a graph I actually got from Sennheiser. This is the IE600 and the IE900. This is a raw measurement, so you're going to see treble elevation due to ear gain, and this is on the B&K 5128, so we can actually see the measurements above 10 kilohertz. And what do we get? Well, as you can see right here, the IE600 extends deeper than the IE900. It's also more present between 2 and 3 kilohertz, and while we do still see some elevation at 9 kilohertz and at 7 kilohertz, it's not as much as the IE900, and I think the added presence of the IE600 between 2 and 3 kilohertz really helps that area not sound bright. And I think the big result of this is that we're getting a more natural ear gain out of the IE600 than out of the IE900. It's like I've said in the past, nothing makes a peak sound like a peak quite as much as a dip right before it. And the IE600, well, it doesn't have that same dip. I spoke to Sennheiser recently about their tuning choices in this, and I wanted to know how they felt about target adherence versus subjective sound. And one of the things that they said is that when people get into the high end, of course, target adherence is good, but it's not perfect. That target adherence is more of a guideline, and then there's fine-grained tuning that needs to happen from there to make something truly magical. And that is what they've done with the IE600. Now, granted, there will probably be people who prefer the IE300. There's probably people who prefer the IE900. But for myself, and I think for the vast majority of listeners, the IE600 takes the cake by a long shot. Now let's talk about amplification and then conclusions. Of course, this is an IEM. It doesn't take a lot of power, but DAC quality does matter. I've been using the AKM version of the FiiO K9 Pro, and I've been using it with these IEMs on the 4.4mm balanced connection with low gain. I find that pairing to be fantastic because that amp is very, very low noise, but is also spectacular sounding. I think the sounds of both that amplifier, DAC, and this IEM complement each other very well, but let's be honest, most people are probably not going to be using this at a desk. So with that said, if you were using this on the go, the main things I think to pay attention to are using the 4.4mm connection, because I really do actually feel like this is one of the rare cases where an IEM did benefit from having a balanced connection, and the quality of your DAC matters a lot. The benefits of this is you don't have to spend as much money on a high power mobile amp, and I think nearly any 4.4mm capable DAP will do the job just fine. So wrapping this up, obviously I like the IE600 quite a bit. In my mind, it completely replaces the need for both the IE300, the IE900, and many other IEMs in my collection, like, well, the Canera Nana. This is now my go-to IEM. Enough so that I've found myself using it at the house when I have the option to use over-ear headphones. Now that isn't to say I use it every day. I still grab plenty of things off the headphone wall, but the IE600 is an IEM that actually makes me want to use IEMs. And you can bet next time that I'm traveling, this is the only thing I'll be bringing with me. So that is going to wrap this video up. If you liked it, please leave a like down below. A comment letting me know what you want to see in the future and what you think about the IE600 or your favorite IEMs. If you want to get active in the community, you can on the forum link to the video description. As always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this. Until the next one. Peace.